himself like a xylophone set on automatic. Dark monster is a savage with technical skills and crazy vocal acrobatics. I'm a legend of the NHO with etho, beef and double O. Doc MC is coming for you sevenfold. Got Random Dog, another fireman to douse the flames that you shoot at this Leviathan. His skull can try again.
You think I'm in hiding, I'm just biding my time. Putting pen to paper, coming up with rhymes. We're the star-studded group got together just to crush you. Once we start something, you know we're gonna see it through. I'm not the soldier who brings the fight at first light. Y'all had to end this, so now I gotta end that. You're guilty of getting murdered with words. Y'all are outgunned, go home nerds.
Hermit gang, 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 hermit gang.
If you think you can stop the symmetry, that's false. Your team is battling for help, but I'm ignoring their calls. And when their bodies dissolve, you know that force is on a killing spree. Try to stab my PvP and perish painfully. I'm the queen of hearts, heads and body parts. She damn I'm a competitor. My martial arts, I'll send a poison dart to make you breathe your final breath. G-Team's name will be the only thing left.
Caffeinated, animated, redstone innovator. My behavior's crazy, can't face me. Impulse is never lazy. Tango, why would you betray me? Now my scope is aiming. Better run from cover from all the gas spells that I be taming. Without a sound, without no hesitation, my creations are amazing. Better watch your step or the G-Team will end up blazing. Who's the better team? There is no controversy. But before it's said and done, y'all be begging us for mercy.
Hermit gang, 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 hermit gang.
Oh, X gon' give it to ya, I'm gon' give it to ya. X gon' give it to ya, what? Lyrical boxing, dropping blows on all my foes. In the G-Team, they're looking unclean, needing some sunscreen. Our words to hurt, this hurt, and it hurts. It's some nerdism, am I right? The min journey. I got laser custom razors, flexing eyes and flavor. Defenses like trenches, then these presenting. They're presenting more, right? They're not good. They're not very good over that. I can walk over that. I can jump over that. I can jump over that. I can use an ultra. DJs.
Now I'm back on some things I wanna say. What's the level that starts to be on the bit? Hey, ladies and the diggity all the way. Kev, Cleo don't know who she freaking with. All the signs say to notify her next of kin. This bigoted dog been dropping bombs, nothing but hits. Hey, spit that right again. Cause the message is I can mumble rap and still be the best there is.
Hermit gang, 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 hermit gang.
Oh, you wanted me to do a verse? I'd have to check with G-Team. I mean, I'll have to check with my schedule and see if I'm able to do that sort of thing, you know. Busy guy. Oh, you know, bananas. You know, bananas. Bananas. I just don't know if it's a good idea for me to be part of this song.
Listen, Green, nobody touches my bush. You're done. It all started when Green touched my redstone. He played himself like a xylophone set on automatic. Dark Monster is a savage with technical skills and crazy vocal acrobatics. I'm a legend of the NHO with etho, beef and double O. Doc MC is coming for you sevenfold. Got Random Dog, another fireman to douse the flames that you shoot at this Leviathan. His skull can try again.
You think I'm in hiding, I'm just biding my time. Putting pen to paper, coming up with rhymes. We're the star-studded group got together just to crush you. Once we start something, you know we're gonna see it through. I'm not the soldier who brings the fight at first light. Y'all had to end this, so now I gotta end that. You're guilty of getting murdered with words. Y'all are outgunned, go home nerds.
Hermit gang, 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 hermit gang. Hermit gang, hermit gang, hermit
If
gang.
you think you can stop the symmetry, that's false. Your team is battling for help, but I'm ignoring their calls. And when their bodies dissolve, you know that false is on a killing spree. Try to pee and perish painfully. I'm the queen of hearts, heads and body parts. She diamond armor, come competitor. My martial arts, I'll send a poison dart to make you breathe your final breath. G-Team's name will be the only thing left.
Behavior's crazy, can't face me. Impulse is never lazy. Tango, why would you betray me? Now my scope is aiming. Better run from color gas spells that I be taming. Without a sound, without no hesitation, my creations are amazing. Better watch your step or the G-Team will end up losing. Who's the better team? There is no controversy, but before it's said and done, y'all be begging us for mercy.
Hermit gang, 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 hermit gang.
Oh, X gon' give it to ya, I'm gon' give it to ya. X gon' give it to ya, what? Lyrical boxing, dropping blows on all my foes. In the G-Team, they're looking unclean, needing some sunscreen. Our words to hurt this herd of nerds. It's absurd how my rhymes got them injured. Danger, danger, I got lasers to cut 'em up like razors. Flexing season and I got flavour. No weak defences like trenches and fences that these dense heads are presenting. They're presenting them alright. They're not very good. I could walk over that. I could jump over that. I could use an ender pearl. My elytra. Come on, G-Team. Jeez.
You know, I don't know what to say. Let me see.
Hermit gang, 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 hermit gang.
And was also a dedicated fireman. This incident baffled everyone, and New York State Police Major John Tibbetts Jr. said that the incident was a head-scratcher. This whole incident makes no sense at all, and many questions remain unanswered. Why did Danny take his boots and skis off before the disappearance? How did he travel anywhere in such deep snow and without boots or skis? Why did no one else ever see this reported rig truck? Why couldn't he remember any of the time he spent missing? Who took Danny in the first place, and what was the motive behind any of this? He wasn't robbed or injured. And finally, how in the world did he manage to travel 2,500 miles away from the location of the disappearance? It's just absolutely mind-blowing, and I can't think of an easy explanation for this case. Now, let's review some strange cases where experienced hunters have disappeared under strange circumstances. 74-year-old Barry Zeldin was an experienced hunter and left his home with his dog Taffy on October the 7th, 2013. He told his wife that he was leaving to put some bait at a deer stand near Chatsworth in the Warren Grove recreation area. Barry's wife, Janet, didn't panic when he didn't come home or call her that Monday night, as according to her, Barry was a spontaneous person and would often go on hunting trips that would last for several days. She was quoted as saying that she didn't think much of it and maybe he was just tracking a deer. The area in which Barry had gone missing is an underdeveloped wilderness area which is thought to see a lot of hiking. Now, when Barry didn't return home on the following day, Janet began to panic. She called Barry every hour for 2 days straight, but never received an answer.
Authorities at the time confirmed that they believed Barry was in the Burlington County side of the park when he disappeared. Janet couldn't sit idly by and drove to the Audubon Gun Club, where she received the help of several members of the club who went out looking for Barry. On Saturday, members of the gun club found his vehicle. Inside, his keys were still in the ignition, the windows were down, and his mobile phone was on the dashboard, and thankfully his dog Taffy was still alive waiting beside the car for Barry. It's thought that Taffy had survived on the corn and molasses which was supposed to be for the deer. The authorities staged a large search effort for Barry. Helicopters and sniffer dogs would join the search to no avail. Like many of the cases, the helicopters were unable to find any trace of the missing man, and the sniffer dogs were unable to pick up a scent at all, once more leaving the search and rescue teams baffled. Janet, trying to keep spirits high, stated that, "I know he's good in the woods, that's why I've never worried. He knows what he's doing in the woods, he's an avid hunter, he could probably survive out there indefinitely." However, Barry's daughter, Zeldin, would later state, "It's just like he vanished. His car was found with Taffy. She's okay, but we're afraid of what might have happened because he loved that dog. He would never have left her anywhere if he wasn't going to be right back." Barry has never been found, and his disappearance remains a mystery. It seems unlikely that Barry was attacked by either an animal or a person, as no evidence exists for either claim. No blood or scraps of clothing was ever found, and no tracks were found either. All of Barry's belongings were still inside the car, making it very unlikely that he had been robbed. Again, the dogs couldn't pick up Barry's scent, which just doesn't make a lot of sense, and why was his heat signature never found? It's unlikely that any of these questions will ever be answered, and people can't agree on what happened here. Now, here's another case. Bart Shaler was a very good woodsman and hunter. On September the 14th, 2010, Bart embarked on a trip to the Canadian wilderness. His last contact was with the chartered float plane that left him at the larger of the Reed Lakes in Canada's Yunkin Territory. This lake was located on the southern slope of the Selwyn Mountains, around 175 miles away from the town of Whitehorse. As far as I'm aware, the nearest settlement is Stewart's Crossing, which is located 15 miles away, so Bart's location was very remote. The plane arrived 2 weeks later to pick up Bart, but he was nowhere to be seen. Bart had disappeared. It was noted that this was strange, as Bart knew how to handle himself in remote areas and was a survival expert. It was also reported that Bart was very well equipped for this trip, as he had enough food to last for at least 2 weeks, warm clothing and camping gear such as a tent and an inflatable boat. After the Canadian authorities were made aware of the situation, they launched what was described as a comprehensive search of the area, but was unable to find anything at all. The authorities noted that Bart had lunch at the campsite, since the remaining food was found on the surface Bart had been using alongside all of the food crates. Unfortunately, the authorities weren't able to provide much of an explanation as to Bart's whereabouts, except to say that he must have hiked out and gotten lost. One of Bart's friends was dissatisfied with this investigation and had a friend fly him out there to conduct his own search. After searching the area, they noted that all of the equipment was still there, and in the surrounding area they found his backpack, bear spray, a knife and a VHF radio. Panicking now, they stated that there was no way Bart would have hiked out and left key equipment behind. On the second day of searching, they found his bow near his inflatable boat. Strangely, the bow and arrows were leaned up against a tree where he must have set up his hunting spot. Around this area is where they found his camouflage face mask with blood and hair on it, and at this point they called the authorities back to the area. The authorities returned and another comprehensive search was conducted of the area. There they found a baseball cap, camouflage pants, a camera, part of a skull and a few bones scattered around. These items were located over 60 meters away from the bow. The skull was later confirmed as belonging to Bart. At first, the authorities concluded that Bart must have been taken surprise by a bear attack, as part of his bones were surrounded by bear excrement. However, there was no fabric in the samples, leading searchers to be skeptical of this conclusion. Bizarrely, there wasn't a sign of a struggle of any kind, which you would surely expect from a bear attack. The vegetation and surrounding ground simply weren't disturbed. To make matters even more strange, the balaclava found only contained a little blood and his pants contained even less. The searchers noted that during a bear attack you would expect the clothes to be completely shredded and soaked in blood, except this wasn't the case. The plastic containers that contained the food were also not disturbed, leading the searchers to conclude that this was very unlikely to be as a result of animal predation, as given the proximity the canned food would surely have been eaten or at least damaged. The searchers detailed that the evidence left behind led them to believe that the findings of the area was a result of later scavenging and not caused by a violent attack. People are generally in agreement that Bart's disappearance was very strange, but can't agree on why this is the case. The official explanation is that of a bear attack, but the Vancouver pathologist who examined the remains could find no puncture wounds or scratches at all, which you would expect from animal predation. So, just what exactly happened to Bart? Moving on from this case, let's explore and review some very bizarre coincidences documented by author Steph Young. The following has been paraphrased from her book, A Terror in the Woods. Tom Young owned a bookstore in a former mining outpost named Silver Plume, which is located in Clear Creek County in Colorado. This was a very rural area, and the town Tom lived in was home to a population of less than 200 people. It was so scarcely populated, in fact, that it was often referred to as a ghost town. According to the locals, Tom was considered a very pleasant man who was well liked around the town. They said that he was always with his dog, Gus, who would often go for walks along the nearby hills. On the 7th of September 1987, Tom had told his friends that he was going on a short vacation and left with his dog. Unfortunately, Tom was never seen alive again. 10 months after Tom set off on his vacation, 2 hunters would come across his skeletal remains propped up against a tree in the middle of the mountains. Gus was also nearby, along with a handgun and a backpack. It was later determined that Tom and Gus had both suffered from a single gunshot wound to the head. The sheriff's department deemed it a clear-cut case of suicide. The locals, however, weren't convinced that this was the case and that his death was made to look like a suicide. Now, let's get bizarre. Following on from this incident, Keith Reinhardt opened an antique store at the location of the former bookstore. Keith was also a professional writer and frequently wrote a sports column for the Chicago Herald. After speaking to the locals and finding out about Tom, Keith took a particular interest in Tom's incident and wanted to write a fiction novel based on Tom's case. Keith began by researching the case and eventually decided that he wanted to head to the location of Tom's death. Keith told his friends and family about his trip and they advised that he shouldn't go, but Keith followed through with his trip and left one day at 4 PM. He was also told that this was too late to go as it would take up to 3 hours to reach the location and then 3 hours to make it back. Obviously, this wasn't preferential as this meant that Keith had to hike back in the dark. Unfortunately, much like Tom, Keith was never seen again. The following day, a massive search effort was underway to locate him. Hundreds of people, including sniffer dogs and helicopters, were out scouring the area for him, but to no avail. Bizarrely, the dogs couldn't pick up a scent at all and no heat signature could be found. Interestingly, the rescue team leader, Charlie Szymanski, noted that his group had found every single person who had ever gone missing in that area in the last 3 decades and that there wasn't a single clue left behind as to where he went. There was no sign of an animal attack, no foul play was suspected, and no one could figure out why the dogs couldn't pick up a scent as this wasn't normal behaviour. The search lasted for over a week and was reported to have grown in intensity over the time. One of the helicopters involved in the search crashed, killing the pilot in doing so. It has been 30 years since Keith went missing and to this day his whereabouts remain a mystery. Now, while that incident was a strange coincidence, it isn't as strange as this one. 15-year-old Michael Palmer vanished on June the 4th in Wasilla, located in the Matasanukak Susitna Valley in Alaska. This strange incident took place when he was at a party with some of his school friends. As the party came to a close early in the morning, Michael and his friends got on their bikes and began riding home. They all rode together and was having friendly banter during their 9-mile journey. During this trip, the friends noticed that Michael was no longer riding with them and as a result pulled up to a night grocery store at 4 AM to wait for him. Michael, however, was never seen again, and when questioned by the police, the boys said that they didn't know where he went and thought that he must have taken a different room home for some reason. What was interesting to me is that the boys never heard a sound, no screams or cries for help, no thuds to indicate a crash or a fall or anything of that sort. Later, the police would find what they concluded to be Michael's bike in the Little Susitna River. However, Michael's brother said that it was not the bike that he had been riding that night. Following the missing persons report, a search effort was underway to find Michael. Divers combed the river thoroughly and troopers searched the nearby woods to no avail. Michael was absolutely nowhere to be found. In a bizarre turn, according to a report by the Charlie's Project Missing Persons website, Michael's muddy sneakers were discovered by a boy who had attended the same party. They were found nearby on a private plane runway connected to a home roughly 200 meters away from the location of the bike. The locals generally went by the assumption that Michael must surely have drowned in the river or had somehow gotten lost in the woods. However, sniffer dogs were present throughout the entire search and at no point were they able to pick up the boy's scent. No evidence was ever found, Michael's remains were never found, and his belongings were also never found. The authorities determined that a crime had not been committed as there was no evidence to suggest that this was the case. Now, this is where things get really bizarre. His two remaining brothers, obviously adults now, went on a snowmobile trip with a group of their friends and family in the Talkeetna Mountains, roughly an hour away from their home during April. Once they arrived at their cabin and got set up, it was dark and the group headed out for a ride on their snowmobiles. Before setting off, the eldest brother pulled out until the morning as his snowmobile was damaged and needed some repairs. Chuck, on the other hand, went along with the group. They set off, and while Chuck had snowmobile experience, this one was new and he hadn't ridden it yet. Whilst getting used to his new machine, the rest of the group travelled at a faster pace than he did, and at some point Chuck was left behind. This was the last time anyone ever saw Chuck, and his older brother sadly went on to note that he blamed himself as normally he would be the one at the back of the group making sure everyone stayed together. He also went on to note that the other men were more experienced with their snowmobiles. In a strange turn, the group would later reveal that the last time they saw Chuck, he was riding off in the wrong direction away from them. The group called out for him, but he continued on almost like he wasn't listening to the group. Thinking that he must have been going back to the cabin, the group continued on. The following morning, over 50 search and rescue trackers arrived in an attempt to find Chuck. Bizarrely, his snowmobile was found, but there was absolutely no sign of Chuck and there were no footprints surrounding his machine. This caused one of the searchers to say that it was almost like he had been plucked right out of the sky, as he simply couldn't believe that there were no footprints and had no explanation for this bizarre finding. This search went on for weeks on end. The searchers believed that they simply would have had to have found him as there was literally nowhere to go. The sneak was too deep for Chuck to have gotten very far away. A couple of months had passed, and in June the weather became warmer, resulting in the snow slowly melting on the mountain. Planes were deployed to fly around the area in search for Chuck's body, but again everyone was left completely baffled when they couldn't find a single trace of him. The logical conclusion was that Chuck must have died from hypothermia, though they couldn't figure out why there were no footprints and why neither his body or any clothing was ever found. It would have been impossible to walk very far in the conditions on the mountain at the time, so where did he go? His body should have been found in a very small radius surrounding the snowmobile, and yet it wasn't. Noting that the group said that he was heading off in the wrong direction, was there any chance that Chuck was being enticed away from them? Where was he going? Why weren't there any footprints? Why was his body or any pieces of clothing never found? Just what happened here? It's likely that this sinister coincidence of the two brothers' disappearance under strange circumstances will remain a very dark mystery. I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of you who have subscribed to the channel and left nice comments. It's been overwhelming and mind-blowing to see all of the support. Also, a massive thank you to my patrons Izode for supporting me over at Patreon. I can't thank you enough, and I really do appreciate all of the generosity and support. If you'd like to check out my Patreon, you can find the link in the description. I'd love to hear what you thought of this one, and I'm excited to read all of the comments, so be sure to let me know what you thought. These incidents always make me go cold, and I'm not sure if it's the actual disappearance itself or the heartbreak the families must feel that gets me the most. Please remember to check out the description for all of the sources and links. There's also a link in the description to buy David's books and Steph Young's book, which is sourced in the description. I'm also going to be creating a poll soon on a video that I'm thinking about making. I was thinking about making a video exploring the various theories that make an attempt to explain the missing 411 cases. I personally don't like to speculate too much about the nature of the disappearances, but I do think it's as a result of something out of the ordinary. I know most people don't stay until the very end, but if you're here, then you'll have to let me know in the comments beforehand. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. I hope that you have a great day, or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.
A lot of people disappear chasing a dog into the wilderness. The second part of that scenario is when people disappear, when they're found without shoes or other pieces of clothing.
Every year, hundreds of people go missing in the wilds of North America. David Paulides, investigative journalist and ex-detective, has spent years investigating the circumstances under which these people go missing. These people, however, don't go missing under the circumstances you might expect. Often, they go missing without a trace, right under the noses of their friends and family. Sniffer dogs are unable to pick up a scent and are often found whimpering and walking around in circles. Park rangers and other authorities involved are reluctant to speak up, almost as if they are aware something bizarre is happening but don't want to cause a panic. Strange weather patterns sometimes erupt right after someone goes missing, almost as if nature itself doesn't want the missing to be found. The victims that are found dead are often in a place that has been searched thoroughly by the search and rescue teams. Other times, they're found in places of extreme elevation without an explanation as to how they got there. Experienced hunters that understand the woods and their surroundings better than most go missing, right under the nose of their companions. And, if that's not strange enough, items of clothing are often missing, or found inside out, and the shoes also go missing. To make matters even more strange, the feet or socks of the victim are clean, leaving experts and authorities baffled. For those that are found, they often have very strange tales to tell. Children who are found detail that they were fed berries by Mr. Wolf, while others have no memory of even being missing. Paulides has noted in the past that the abducted are often first or last in line when hiking through remote areas, almost as if they are snatched, but no screams are ever heard. Now, let's review some of the cases that highlight the missing shoes problem. In an interview with Where Did the Road Go, Paulides noted the following case. 5-year-old Jerry Hayes went missing on November the 10th, 1938 in Rucker Canyon, which is located in the Chiricahua Mountains in Arizona at an elevation of between 6,000 and 7,500 feet. Jerry was considered to be very frail as he suffered from rheumatism, which is a disease marked by inflammation and pain in the joints and muscles. He couldn't walk far on his own and required help once his condition flared up. It's noted that this condition can come into effect rapidly and can be very intensive, causing the joints to stiffen and lock up. Jerry was with his family and some friends on a hunting camping trip. During this particular visit, the family and their friends lost track of Jerry as they were walking through the dense forestry. As far as I'm aware, Jerry was with the family the whole time, but was walking at the back of the line and he simply vanished. There were no screams, no cries for help, no thuds to indicate a fall, and nothing to indicate anything had even happened to the boy. The family, beginning to panic, started searching frantically for Jerry. They searched their immediate area and the area they had just come from, as they had seen him not long before the disappearance. They found nothing and called the county sheriff, who took this very seriously and organised a search effort. The search and rescue teams came in force. Within 10 days of the disappearance, there were over 1,000 people searching for Jerry. Early on in the search, however, the sheriff and everyone a part of the search effort was left feeling very confused. Jerry had gone missing in a box canyon, meaning that this particular canyon was surrounded on all sides by high mountains. There was absolutely no way a 5-year-old boy could have climbed up a mountain on his own, especially not with his rheumatism. The only way in and out was the way the family first came in, which had been searched thoroughly multiple times. This baffled the sheriff and led him to believe that the boy must still be within the canyon. Now, it was noted by the family that the boy never wandered far from them, and given his condition, doesn't seem likely that he did. They also noted that he was normally always by their side. The intensive search lasted for over a week and found nothing, not a single trace of the boy, which is beyond strange. Paulides noted that these search and rescue teams are very professional and meticulous about their searches, and also found it bizarre that they didn't find anything. Now, after finding absolutely no sign of Jerry, the military were called in to thoroughly comb the area. They, along with the sheriff and the search and rescue teams, had covered over 150,000 acres of land, and still there was no sign of him. Interestingly, the sheriff came out publicly and made the statement that he had absolutely no idea what could have happened to Jerry. He was confused as to how this could even happen. You would at least expect to find something after a search as large as this. Now, this is where things get really bizarre. 9 days later, on November the 19th, 1938, a group of searchers accidentally strayed from their normal grid search pattern and noticed that there were some faint tracks going uphill on one of the mountains. The tracks were small and left the searchers confused as to what they were. They followed the tracks 1,000 feet up a steep hillside, 4.5 miles now from the location of the disappearance. There, they found Jerry's body lying face down on the ground with no shoes or socks on. His coat was gone and the searchers had absolutely no explanation as to what happened. No one did. Paulides has said that it's important to note that the temperature was hovering around freezing at the time, and the coroner went on to note that the boy had died of exposure. Some questions still remain, however. Why on earth would a lost small boy remove his shoes and socks in this sort of terrain? Why was his jacket never found? Jerry was 1,000 feet up a hillside. With his condition, how in the world could he have gotten up there? This whole incident doesn't make sense. Paulides went on to pose the question, could Jerry have been enticed up there by something? Was something forcing him up the hill? To this day, Jerry's disappearance and death remain a mystery. It's difficult to understand just what happened here. Now, let's review another dark disappearance. The following incident was paraphrased from strangeoutdoors.com. I recommend having a look at the sources in the description. 19-year-old Chuck McCullough was an avid, not to mention experienced photographer and hiker. In 1974, Chuck made the decision to leave his home state of Virginia, and in doing so left his camper van at home. He did this as he wanted to go on an extended photography and hiking trip. It's thought that Chuck really loved his hiking as it gave him the chance to take in the beautiful scenery. Chuck was enjoying his trip and had managed to take many beautiful photos. However, things would take a dark turn in late January 1975. At this point, Chuck was in Eugene, Oregon, and had been staying there for a few weeks with one of his friends. He left by himself and planned on going for a short hitchhiking trip to Crater Lake National Park, as he wanted to take some winter photos with the idea of returning to his friend's house just 2 days later. Now, Chuck did make it to the Diamonds Lake area, which is nearby the national park, as a number of people reported seeing him there. It was theorised that Chuck must have planned on hiking to Crater Lake along the North Road. Unfortunately, this was terrible timing as the previous 2 weeks saw heavy snowfall which dropped over 5 feet of snow. Cross-country skiers at the time reported that this snow was very soft and powdery and that even they, with all their equipment, were sinking up to their waists. This, by all accounts, was a very bad time to choose to hike, and that notion would prove to be true. Chuck was never seen again, and it was thought that he must have gone missing during this hike. Now, after hearing that his son was missing, Chuck's father dropped everything and rushed to Oregon as fast as he could. An intensive air and ground search was underway. His father, alongside search and rescue teams, searched tirelessly for Chuck, but found absolutely nothing. There was no evidence of any kind. Not a single trace of Chuck was found, and his father had spent the entire summer camped at Crater Lake, unable to accept that his son had simply vanished. Unfortunately, his father never found him. Towards the end of 1976, on October the 13th, 2 Texan hikers had gotten lost after taking a wrong turn during their travels. They ended up in a remote canyon along a trail that didn't see much use in the Sphagnum Bog area of the national park. As the 2 hikers tried to get their bearings, they began exploring their immediate area when one of them noticed an old dirty, ripped backpack lying on the floor. Knowing something was wrong, they called the park rangers, and on the following day, Rangers Larry Smith and Marion Jack mounted their horses and came to search the area where the backpack had been discovered. At 1:30 PM, the radio call came in that would confirm skeleton remains had been found, and these remains would be confirmed as Chuck McCullough. Strangely, the bones were scattered over and down a steep bank of the Bybee Creek drainage. This was around 12 miles from the trailhead. The park rangers discovered a camper van key in a zippered side pocket which matched Chuck's vehicle back home, and the FBI were called in to see the investigation through. Now, this is where things start to become bizarre. Chuck's shoes were missing, literally nowhere to be found, and he was left wearing only his socks. His foot bones were in the socks, but his leg bones were not in the jeans apart from the broken off ends of his shin bones sticking up. The jeans were unbuttoned and the belt had been left undone, and the rest of him was simply gone, almost as if he had been melted away. The crown of his skull was found nearby, but his shirt, coat, and again most importantly his boots were never found. There was literally just an empty pair of pants sitting on a log with socks and foot bones inside. His camera equipment was also never found. Now, in July 2016, Chuck's brother Stephen wrote on the blog offbeatoregon.com, and I quote, "This article was about my brother, Chuck McCullough. Some other details prior to his disappearance. He visited a nearby store. The clerk remembered that he was upset about something and he bought a needle and a thread to repair a tear in his coat. There was no snowmobile involved, he was on foot. The sinister conclusion is the correct one, and the idea that he died of natural causes is just not plausible. He was 2 years older than me. Our father never wanted to talk about it and mostly accepted the official explanation. Our mother did not accept the explanation, and neither do I. Many questions about this incident remain unanswered. Firstly, just how in the world did Chuck manage to travel through 7.5 feet of snow on the ground? He didn't have skis or snowshoes, so how could he travel that kind of distance? Secondly, much like Jerry Hayes, why on earth would he remove his shoes? And finally, just how did he manage to get to the location of his death? This whole case is bizarre and just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's difficult to know what to think. Moving on from Chuck's case, let's review another that happened more recently. This incident was documented by David Paulides and has been highly discussed. You'll find the sources in the description for all of these cases. On March the 14th, 2014, Dr. James McGrogan and 3 of his friends set off on a hike through a populated trail outside Vail, Colorado at 8:30 in the morning. It was thought that the group wanted to reach Eisman Hut, which is a popular lodging location. At 10 o'clock, the group had been hiking for about an hour and a half and took a short break. James, on the other hand, was very fit and often ran marathons. Paulides went on to note that James was in excellent shape. So he kept going and told his friends that he would meet them at the next stop, which the group agreed with. James did not come unprepared. He was in possession of a split snowboard along with a backpack full of supplies, including protective and warm gear, a mobile phone, an extra battery, a shovel, medical supplies and a GPS. Paulides noted that he really came prepared for this hike and seemed to have planned for the worst. Things start to get strange now. The men James was with continued their hike expecting to meet him at the next stop-off point, however James wasn't there. Thinking that he'd likely carried on, the men thought nothing more of it and continued on their way to the next pre-planned stop point. However, James wasn't there. The men, panicking now, began searching frantically and calling out for their friend, but they never received a response. James had seemingly vanished without a trace. At 5:30 in the evening, after searching tirelessly all day, one of the men made the long hike back down the mountain while the other two continued their search. The relevant authorities were then made aware of the situation and the Eagle County Sheriff would organise a massive search effort to find James. The search effort would last for 5 days, and during this time, 3 helicopters were out looking for James, flying over 18 square miles of the area, and they couldn't find a single trace of him. It was noted that something very unusual seemed to have taken place here. On the 6th day, the weather took a turn for the worst, and the rescuers had to call off the search for their own safety. Paulides goes on to note and emphasise that James was in brilliant shape, and at the time the area was full of snow, but the trail remained obvious and was very unlikely that James simply missed it. Now, this is where things get really bizarre. 20 days after the disappearance, 4.5 miles away through very difficult terrain and over a 12,000 foot mountain, James's remains were found by 3 hikers. This baffled everyone, and no one could figure out just how this was possible. That area had been searched previously by the search and rescue teams and they found nothing. It was an impossibility, they thought. And yet, there he was, just absolutely baffling. The sheriff was notified by the 3 hikers and rescue teams travelled to the location to recover James's body. Bizarrely, despite the freezing temperatures, James wasn't wearing a coat, gloves, and his boots were missing. The coroner later noted that the phone in James's backpack worked and had a battery, so why on earth did he not use it? The GPS was also working and would have provided James with directions to make it back. He also noted that despite wearing a helmet, James had a severe head injury along with trauma to the left side of his chest and a broken femur. This was a highly unusual disappearance and many aspects just don't seem to make much sense at all. To this day, the disappearance of James McGrogan remains a mystery. Many questions remain unexplained. Why didn't he leave tracks in the snow? How could he just go missing without a trace? And why weren't helicopters able to find his heat signature? Just how in the world did he manage to travel 4.5 miles and over a mountain? Where and for what reason did he remove his shoes? More importantly, where did they go? Something very unusual occurred here, and I don't suppose we'll ever have any answers to these questions. Just what happened to James? Now, let's review another case. This time, however, it didn't take place in the United States, and this time the shoes didn't go missing, but they were tampered with. September the 17th, 1988, 5-year-old Stephen McCarran was spending some time with his aunt and uncle in Ayr, Scotland. The aunt and uncle had planned a week's trip with Stephen where they were going to do some travelling and visit a popular amusement park called Ayr's Wonder West World. The trip started well and the family were having a lot of fun together, and according to the aunt and uncle, Stephen was having a brilliant time. However, things would take a dark turn. At this point, Stephen was playing and having fun. The aunt and uncle said that they had taken their eyes off him for no more than a minute and he had simply vanished. This happened right under their noses and the boy didn't make a single sound, no screams or cries for help, nothing to suggest a struggle had taken place. The aunt and uncle thought that Stephen must have wandered off, so they searched the immediate area and called out for him, but again, like all of the cases, they never received a response. Panicking now, they notified the park security who performed their own search and were unable to locate the boy. The police were quickly made aware of the situation, which would begin what was described as one of the largest efforts to find a missing child in Scotland's history. Hundreds upon hundreds of searchers turned the whole park upside down looking for the boy. They also searched a 6 square mile radius around the park. Divers got involved and searched nearby rivers and ponds. Aircraft began patrolling the sky but couldn't pick up a heat signature. Stefan had seemingly vanished. This disappearance baffled the police and they had absolutely no idea where to start. Now, if things weren't strange enough already, in the coming days, various reports started coming in about possible sightings of the boy. One person claimed that they had seen the missing boy with a middle-aged man, another witness claimed that he had seen the boy climbing over the park's fence, while another claimed to have seen Stefan walking in a dazed-like state along a nearby road. This again baffled the authorities, who had said that there was no way this boy could have been in the multiple locations at once and began suspecting that a kidnapping had occurred. However, there was no evidence at all of this. It was also suggested that the boy may have simply ran away. However, that was quickly disputed as by all accounts, Stefan loved his family, was well adjusted, happy, loving life and had been excited about the trip. No reason could be thought of as to why he would run away. For the following 2 weeks, the search grew in size. On October the 2nd, 1988, Stefan's body was found 6 miles away from the park. The coroner noted that the boy was not injured, there was no signs of violence or foul play and had no idea why the boy had died, so deemed it as a result of exposure. Now, let's get bizarre. Stefan's body was found in a ditch right in the middle of very rough terrain. Marshes, hills, forests and gullies would all have to have been passed to reach the location. It was noted that it would have been difficult for an adult to make this trip, never mind a young boy. To make matters even more strange, Stefan's socks were placed in his backpack while his shoes were still on, meaning that Stefan had taken off his shoes, followed by the socks, and then put his shoes back on. Authorities determined that no foul play had occurred and that the boy must have ventured out there all by himself, which the family deemed impossible and outright ridiculous. This incident remains a mystery. Again, how on earth did he reach that location? Why were his socks in his backpack? How did he vanish so quickly? These questions have never been answered and likely never will be. Now, the shoes are not important to the next case we're about to review, but I've added it to further highlight the strangeness and complexity of this phenomenon. I can't even begin to explain this one, you tell me. 4-year-old Alfred Balehartz was on a fishing and camping trip with his family at Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park. During this particular day, the family went on a hike along a river and Alfred was at the back of the line when he just simply vanished. Politis has noted in the past that being either first or last sees the most disappearances. Again, like the rest of the cases, there was no shouting or any sign of distress at all. In all of these incidents, the person involved literally just seems to vanish into thin air without an explanation. The family noted that he had been right there with them one moment and then had vanished the next without leaving a single trace. Obviously, despite the parents claiming that the boy hadn't gone near any body of water, the authorities deemed that the boy must have drowned. The rivers were blocked so that a thorough search of the area could be conducted. A 6-mile search of the river for over 5 days didn't provide any sign of the boy. Confused now, the authorities brought in sniffer dogs, which followed the scent for some time before reaching a fork, where they stopped and laid down on the floor. This very scenario happens in so many of the missing 411 cases, and obviously, once again the search team noted that this was odd behaviour for their trained canines and couldn't come up with an explanation. Here's where things get strange. The authorities received a report from a couple of hikers in the area during the early stages of the search, of which these hikers were not aware that anyone was missing. The hikers had been at the location of Old Fall River Road, which was approximately 6 miles away over difficult terrain and around 3,000 feet above where the boy had gone missing. They went on to say that there was a young boy perched on a high ridge in the area which was ominously called the Devil's Nest, which was near the top of Mount Chaplin. They noted that the boy was alone before suddenly being pulled out of sight. They had absolutely no idea how a young boy could get up there alone. Authorities quickly scrambled to the location but found no sign of the boy. Because of the difficult terrain and elevation, it was noted that there was no way the boy could have reached that location by himself and would have needed specialised equipment and experience. Obvious questions remain unanswered here. Just how in the world did Alfred get up there? How did he just vanish without a sound? What was he pulled out of sight by? And why couldn't the canines pick up his scent? I find these incidents so frustrating because these people just go missing under seemingly impossible situations and no closure is ever provided for the families. I think an important lesson to take away here is to be aware of your surroundings and be extremely vigilant around children at all times, especially when out in the wilderness. I can't even begin to imagine the effects this must have on families. What do you think about these cases? Let me know. And once again, I'd just like to thank all of you for your support. I feel like a broken record at this point, but thank you very much for all of the kind comments. The last couple of weeks have been very busy, so I've had a harder time responding to them, but I can assure you that I've read most of them. And I'd just like to thank everyone for keeping the debates in the comments civil, for the most part anyway. I'm also thinking about doing a face reveal soon, so you'll have to let me know if you want me to do that. Also, a massive thank you to my patrons who have enabled me to start making these videos in 4K and literally made this video possible with all of the high quality footage that I've been able to include. I couldn't have made this one without the support, and for that I'm very grateful for the generosity. It's just mind blowing that people want to support the channel. If you'd like to take a look at my Patreon, you can find the link in the description. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. I hope that you have a great day or evening depending on where you are, and be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace. I had a very strange experience 12 years ago in Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. It was so bizarre at the time that I never discussed it. I began reading the Missing 411 stories a few weeks ago and realised what I encountered fits into the Missing 411 profile. Additionally, since many of the Missing 411 stories border on the unexplainable and bizarre, I feel what I encountered was not unique, that it was a part of an actual phenomena. Here is my story. I was visiting my girlfriend in Chicago. On a sunny and calm winter day, we decided to go for a hike at Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. I am an avid hiker, and being on leave from Iraq, I wanted to take in some cool, fresh air. We hiked the park for several hours. In the late afternoon, we decided to head back to the car. About half a mile away from the parking lot, we came into an area where tree branches were broken and pulled towards or over the trail. Most of the branches were broken high up. I'd lived in Washington before going to Iraq and knew something of Sasquatch areas, so I told the girlfriend it looked like a Squatch area due to the branches broken off up high and pulled over the trail. That's about the time things started to get strange. Soon after mentioning this, I felt like someone was staring at me. It's like if you go into a room with a lot of people and someone is focused on you, you get that uneasy feeling and can tell you're being watched. It was like this, but stronger. I started to look around to see who was watching me. It was winter, and the forest was visible hundreds of feet in all directions. There was a group of walkers several hundred feet behind us, and no one in front of us, but I saw no one staring at me. As we passed through the Squatch area, I began to have the feeling someone was behind me, following us. I looked around and listened, but saw and heard nothing. There was just the people 400 or so feet back on the trail, and they were talking amongst themselves. They weren't looking our way. The sense of someone being behind me was so persistent that I kept looking behind me, I'd say at least twice a minute, but there was just the group way back. The feeling of being watched is one thing, but feeling like someone is close behind you is something else, is more disturbing. I told the girlfriend to go further in front of me, and I let her go about 20 feet in front because I had a strong sensation of a nearby presence just behind us. So I turn around. No more than 30 seconds since the last time I looked back, and there is this woman there. She was walking, but coming up on me fast. There was something way off about her speed. She was walking when I spotted her, but her speed was much faster than her gait. It was as if she was on a people mover escalator like in an airport. She was coming up fast, and was I'd say no more than 15 or 20 feet behind me when I saw her. I was rather alarmed and glared at her. She stopped when our eyes met. I gave her a look like, what the F are you doing coming up on me like that? We stood there, staring at each other. Neither of us moved. She had her head cocked back to her left and looked at me from the corner of her eyes in a slightly alarmed, "you caught me" type of look. She was completely normal looking, like a local Chicago lady, late 50s, wearing a bright red winter coat, gloves, slacks, and etc. In hindsight, there are a few other things besides her speed which stand out. The first thing is that there was no sound, no footsteps, no rustling in the woods, nothing to tell me to turn around other than the strong sense of someone behind me which I'd had for a bit. At the speed she was moving, she would had to have been running hard, but I had no footsteps. She was not breathing hard, and her mouth was closed. Her gait was a walking gait. She was not running. However, she was moving towards me at a running speed, I mean fast. When she stopped, I'd say she was less than 20 feet from me. At the speed she was moving in, 1 or 2 seconds and she'd have been on me. The next thing that stands out is her features. She had no distinguishing features at all, none in her hair, skin, or clothing. No shadowing or skin hues, dimples, etc. As a former army criminal investigator, I know to look for distinctive markings on people and clothing. There were none. I'd estimate her height at 5'10", her clothes were of uniform colouring and indistinct. It was like she had just stepped out of a department store. Her bright red coat was pristine with a uniform hue to it. There wasn't even shading, which there should have been given the clear sky and low sun. After staring at each other for I'd say around 5 to 10 seconds, I felt like I got my point across, so I turned around and continued walking. The girlfriend had not noticed anything and had continued walking. I took about 3 steps and realised that there was no way she could have come up from that group in 30 or so seconds since I'd last looked back. There was also nowhere to come from on either side. Visibility at that point was hundreds of feet all around. I said to myself, "No way," and spun back around. She was gone, simply vanished. I checked the group behind us and no one had a red coat on or was looking at us. There was no one else around and there had been no sounds other than my footfalls. The woman just vanished. From that point, it took us about 10 minutes to reach the car. For the remainder of the walk, I did not feel like I was being stared at or followed. I have never been back to Starved Rock State Park and have no intention of going back. The whole thing was bizarre. How was I supposed to tell anyone about that, so I never have. My mental state was fine. I have a high IQ and a 20-year career in a STEM field following army service. At the time, I was working a DoD IT contract in Iraq. I was well rested and relaxed being on vacation with the girlfriend. There were no drugs or alcohol involved. These are strictly prohibited in my line of work and were grounds for immediate termination. I've carried this experience around for 12 plus years, being unable to talk about it because it was so exceptional and unexplainable. It's a relief to read similar stories of unusual encounters and disappearances. After reading many missing 411 accounts and the profile of disappearances, I believe I narrowly averted being snatched by whatever that thing was. I do not think it was the woman I saw. I think it was something different which I could not see. My wife and I just watched the Missing 411 documentary last week, and I've been glued to the work of David Paulides ever since. I've ordered the first book in his series yesterday, and can't wait to read it, but anyway, my wife made me stop the documentary about halfway through the film to share a story that her cousin and people from her home village experienced last year in 2017. My wife has roots in Arctic village that has a native population of about 150 residents that live a mostly subsistence lifestyle located within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska. This village is about as far north as one can get in North America without visiting the northern coastal villages of Alaska. The nearest hub city is Fairbanks, about a 2-hour plane ride south where we live. So obviously, this is a very rural Alaska. But the Gwich'in Athabascan people have lived in this area for thousands of years and have adapted well to the land and animals for sustenance. Arctic Village kind of sits on a plateau in a valley surrounded by vast areas of lakes, marsh, and then beautiful rolling mountains. It is a freaking beautiful region, especially in the summer, and the village has beautiful foliage, bushes, and tundra growth throughout it. But my wife's story actually came from one of her cousins that has 2 boys there. the story her cousin shared went like this. It was fall time up in Arctic Village in 2017. Her cousin's boys were playing outside around the house as they usually would be in the afternoon. I believe that she called out to the boys to head in, and her 3-year-old started up towards the house while her teenager started up shortly after. When her teen reached the home, she asked where his little brother was, and he said that he thought he had already reached the house as he just saw him walking up just a minute or so before. So they started to call out to him and looking around, retracing the path the older boy he just took. Minutes turned into 10 minutes and so on. Now, everyone has a CB radio in Arctic Village, so she got on the radio and started asking around. More and more people started getting involved. Her older boy was even driving around on a 4-wheeler by this time, frantically looking for him. After about an hour or so, my wife's cousin was scanning around the lakes and marshes with binoculars and finally saw something far off in the distance across one of the lakes. It must have been about a mile to the other side of this lake through very rough, wet, marshy terrain. She had her teen drag the 4-wheeler over to check. After about 30 minutes, her 2 boys returned on the 4-wheeler. She just received the scare of a lifetime for any parent. Now, her cousin mentioned a few things that didn't quite seem to make sense. The 3-year-old was perfectly fine and didn't have a drop of mud or debris on him, as if he had trekked his way through the marsh to get there. It was also strange that he had travelled so far in such a short amount of time and without getting at all dirty. And, for some strange reason, he was missing his shoes that for some reason couldn't be found. But what was most troubling is when she asked her boy what happened, he simply said that a big man had taken him. And this was about all she could get from him, as he wasn't a big talker at this age. Why he was taken, and why he was spared, and by what is very perplexing. But, following David Polidi's work really does show similarities to my wife's cousin's story. I consider myself a fairly grounded individual. I don't have any neurological problems, nor history of mental illness or disorder. I'm getting that out of the way before I explain an incident that occurred 10 years ago. At the time, I was living in a small village not far from the coast of southeast England, UK. It was a remarkably nice day for the time of year, being mid-October, dry and sunny with a clear sky, no promise of rain or inclement weather in sight. I had decided to walk into the nearby town to get a haircut, a walk of perhaps 35 minutes, and set off to do so. I made my way in good time to my barber's and enjoyed a chat, coffee, and a trim. I bid farewell, promising to return in 3 weeks as per usual when business was concluded, and made my exit. I recall closing the door to the barber's behind me and rubbing my neckline and face with the tissue provided. It's at this point things got weird. I turned the corner of the street and found myself sat on a bench in an unfamiliar location. Shocked at this surprising locale and not being aware of how I arrived there, I bolted upright and to my surprise found myself staring at headstones. I was in a large cemetery, one that I had never had a cause to visit but had been past as a child of 7 or 8 on days out with my grandparents. More surprising to me was the pain. My face, hands and legs hurt. On closer inspection, I was covered in deep scratches, however, none of which were bleeding anymore, but had begun to congeal and knit together as if hours had passed. In my clothes, I found snagged thorns and reasoned that I had at some point pushed through a thorny area to reach my destination. I checked my watch. It was 3 hours since I had left the barber's. To this day, I don't know how I got there, but it goes to show how these things can happen. I'm English and love the outdoors. I do loads of hiking on my own in the Lake District, had a lot of work up there around this time and it meant being away from the family, but I loved and embraced the solitude when I got the chance. I'm actually collecting the Wainwrights, which means getting to the top of all 214 peaks in Cumbria. I'm at about 140 at the moment, so really experienced and very careful to know where I am on both GPS and paper maps. About 5 years ago, I was walking a route around some of the bigger mountains. One of the peaks on this walk is called the Great End, and the suggested route seemed too far away, so I thought I'd check for the other paths that were closer to where I was. I looked at the map and there was a path right next to me, so I looked and saw a slightly trod path heading up, not too steep from where I was standing. There was a bit of ice and snow on the side, but nothing put me off. As I said, it wasn't steep, but after about 30 seconds on this path, I all of a sudden started panicking. Normally, I'm really level-headed. I couldn't work out what was wrong, but a nasty feeling came over me, like an impending doom. I thought that I needed to call this one off as I really didn't feel right. I turned around to head back down the path and couldn't believe it. I had somehow managed to walk up a near vertical cliff covered in snow. The only way down was to shuffle on my backside, and even then I could have slipped and killed myself with a slightly wrong move. I had been using my telescopic walking pole on the way up but could not find it anywhere. Now, this is a busy part of the world and it was a beautiful day, but there wasn't a soul to be seen. It took me about 20 minutes to shuffle down this icy slope and back onto the path. I looked back to where I'd come from and could clearly see that this was not a path but a really dangerous and craggy buttress, and could see the points where I decided to turn back. There is no way I could have got there without climbing, and absolutely no way I could have done it in 30 seconds, more like 5 to 10 minutes. I looked at the map again and the path I had spotted was a lot further around the base. I'm posting this here. It's my first post on Reddit because I've recently become properly obsessed with the missing 411 and thought this might tie in with some of the commonalities. I just saw, not a couple of hours ago, my first couple of videos by David Paulides on the strange happenings of the people that go missing in national parks in North America. The story that really got me was the one of the female bow hunter that saw some type of almost invisible creature in the tree line. This got me thinking about something strange that happened to me when I was 10 and a couple of years after it. I live in Toronto, ON. For those that don't know, it's the Great White North in one of our biggest cities. My house backed onto a quiet private section of the ravine that runs along the east side of Toronto. No one ever that I have seen, and I've lived there for 10 years, walked there because there was no path and it was all overgrown to hell. My friend and I would spend hours down there building makeshift camps and small contained fires in holes that we dug. One day, I went down alone with a backpack full of snacks and tools for digging. When I got down to the bottom, everything felt off and I instantly felt sick and paranoid. Every hair jumped up and the only feeling I had was to go back up. I shook it off as nothing and walked towards the small incline that led to the creek bed. When I got to the incline, I got the same feeling, but even worse. My heart started to race. I took a second to look around to reassure myself that everything was okay. I saw nothing, so I continued on. I took one step when I heard something moving behind me. I turned around to see this 6 foot, and it could be taller because it was hunched over a bit, person-like thing in all black. Now, when I say all black, I'm talking like a black, skin-tight suit from head to toe with a hood-like thing that makes any shape of a face non-existent, as if you were staring right into a black hole. I stood there in fear as I could feel that we were looking directly at each other. It stood in a position like it was trying to run, but when I turned around, it froze in place. I can remember its chest and back moved as it breathed. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds when the first instinct I had was to run came into my head, and I booked it down the creek towards the side of the ravine with the path. When I stopped running, I looked all around me, making sure I wasn't followed by whatever that was. The months following that incident were unnerving as all hell, as whatever that thing was would show up in my backyard. The first time I saw it, I thought it was my imagination, but when I saw this thing peek its head from behind my shed to then step out and look right at me to then go back behind was when I knew that it had to be real. In total, I saw this thing maybe 10 times after that first incident. Each time though, enough time had passed that I somewhat forgot about it. I would see it in monthly or yearly intervals. I have no idea what I saw and what could have happened if I didn't turn around to come eye to eye with it. I thought that maybe if I put my crazy story here that I've only told to my best friend and my girlfriend up to this point, that maybe it might have some ties or no ties at all to something, or maybe this was just some strange stuff that happened to young me. I'd love to know what you think of the missing 411 in general. Do you think there's a simple explanation to this, or do you think there's something more to it? I'm excited to see people's opinions on this. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope that you have a great day or evening depending on where you are. And remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.
Things started happening on the property. The first thing that I realized when I started seeing things here was that I was woefully unprepared. We used to find things moved around in the house, you know, furniture and stuff moved around in the house. They're trying to make a statement.
Most people are familiar with Skinwalker Ranch and the strange occurrences there, but close by in the Valley of the Sun in Arizona lies another bizarre ranch. John Edmonds had always wanted a ranch from being a small child. He loved animals and had a dream of owning his own ranch where he could rescue horses and canines and give them a better life. In 1996, psychiatric therapist and former FBI employee John Edmonds and his wife Joyce bought Stardust Ranch. This ranch would soon become a living nightmare for the family. On the first day of moving into the property, John would find out that the previous owners had left all of their belongings inside the house almost as if they had left in a hurry. John called the real estate agent that had sold the house and voiced his complaint. He was advised that the previous owners would come back and everything would be removed within a few hours, and that in the meantime, John should go to the nearby town to kill some time. At this point, Joyce was at work, so John went alone. Later that day, John would return home to a very bizarre sight. All of the belongings that were inside the house, including the appliances, were now trashed and at the bottom of the empty swimming pool outside. John, angry and confused, called the estate agent again and told him that the previous owners had been and trashed his pool with all of their belongings. This baffled the estate agent, and he said that the previous owners did come to pick up their stuff, but they thought that John must have angrily thrown their furniture into the pool, and as a result they refused to retrieve their belongings. John was never able to get in contact with the family again. 3 days later, John finally managed to clean up the pool and move in. He was stood in the kitchen putting some things away when he noticed a man walking towards the gate of the ranch. He described the man as looking like an old veteran of the military. He was wielding a machete and continued making his way to the ranch. John, obviously apprehensive about this, grabbed his gun, concealed it, and went out to confront the man. John asked the man what he was doing there, and the man strangely replied that he lived and worked there. John, now confused, told the man that he'd just bought the property and asked what the man did on the ranch. The man shook his head and said that he kills the monsters. John, thinking the man was talking about birds or some other predator, asked him what he meant, and the man said that he'll find out soon enough. John then asked him to leave. The man turned and said that you'll be sorry for not letting me stay. The man left and John never saw him again. Some time had passed and things had been normal up to this point. John and Joyce had settled into their home and was enjoying the property. John had been able to fulfill his dream to look after some resettled horses. Now, it's important to note that this was in 1996, a time before everyone had mobile phones glued to their hands, and John wanted to get a phone line installed into the house. He rang the local phone company and asked if he could have the line installed. They told him yes, except no one ever came, and this was repeated 2 more times until John got annoyed and spoke with the manager. The manager seemed confused and promised John that someone would come out to the house this time. When the worker arrived, he seemed apprehensive and worried about getting out of his truck. John came on, very confused now, asked what he meant, and the worker said, "Don't you know about your house?" Thinking the man was just being dramatic, John joked and said sure, it's big, beautiful, and in the middle of nowhere. The man, being dead serious, told John that many strange things had happened on the property before his arrival, so John inquired about the history of the house. He learned that the original owner and builder of the house purchased it as a surprise for his wife. She came to look at their new home and she said that she couldn't live there, that she felt a very dark presence on the property and was too afraid to move in. That was the only time she stepped foot on the property and never returned. Eventually, this led the couple to divorcing and the man sold the property. Eventually, later owners would come to turn the land into a ranch, and by all accounts were very successful ranchers. They ended up having children and lived happily at the ranch for a long time. At least, they were happy up until the day before their son graduated from high school. For unknown reasons, their son committed suicide with the use of a shotgun. No one could figure out why this was the case. He had a lot of friends, wasn't bullied, and was doing very well academically. It seemed as though he had a bright future ahead of him. After this incident, the owners could no longer remain at the ranch and they sold it. Now, shortly after having the phone line installed, things started to get strange. On several occasions, the Edmonds would start to see lights in the distance. Thinking that people were on the ranch with flashlights, John would investigate, only to find these lights would rapidly zoom off away from him, sometimes across the land and other times into the sky. These incidents would come to leave John baffled, and he had no idea what was going on. Joyce would later remark that she was scared of whatever was happening as it didn't seem natural. She wanted to sell the property, but John couldn't give up his dream. He was quoted as saying, "This is my ranch and I won't be chased off by lights." They kept silent about these occurrences as they didn't want to deal with the stigma of being associated with UFOs and other bizarre phenomena. However, things were about to get dark. John would start to find dead animals on the ranch, but he had no idea what sort of predator could be causing it. The animals were mutilated and would be drained of all blood. They would be missing their eyes and tongue, which seemed to be removed with surgical-like precision. His horses would seemingly vanish, and some of the family dogs also found themselves victims to this mutilation. He would later find out that he was not the only one affected by this, and other people in the surrounding area also made complaints of their animals being killed and disappearing. John would begin to notice other seemingly impossible events. One morning, while walking to his horses, he noticed that some of the heavy metal fence panels, weighing around 100 pounds, were bent like pretzels. One of them was tied around one of his horses. John said that he had absolutely no idea what could have done this. He called the livestock board and they were baffled too, offering no explanation, except to say that it wasn't a coyote or anything like that, which obviously wasn't helpful to the Edmonds. Some time had gone by now, and John started to get an eerie feeling that someone was watching him and his wife. He couldn't quite explain it, but said that it was really creepy and tried to keep his discomfort a secret from Joyce as he didn't want to scare her. He said that it got so bad that he didn't even want to get in the shower because it just felt as though there was someone there with him. Joyce would later remark that the house just didn't feel right. When John asked what she meant, she said, "I just don't feel alone." She again requested that they sell the property and leave, but John remained adamant that he wasn't going to be scared out of his own home. One night, they went to bed, and on this particular night, Joyce was snoring loudly, which was preventing John from falling asleep. That feeling of not being alone returned and crept back up on him. He said that he began to see 3 shadows slowly moving around the room. This scared John deeply, and he was frozen in place. Remembering that he kept a baseball bat beside his bed, John regained his composure and reached for his weapon. What happened next made him go cold. He felt something lightly tapping against his outstretched arm. He grabbed his bat with one hand and grabbed whatever was touching him with the other. John jumped out of bed and hit what he described as a grey-coloured entity with his bat multiple times, but said after the 3rd strike it just vanished along with the other 2. John quickly dropped the bat, woke Joyce up and exclaimed that he knows what killed the horses. Now, after this incident, these entities began to make themselves known to the Edmonds. Late at night, both John and Joyce would begin to describe seeing entities that they thought were extraterrestrials. They were normally small in size, around 3 feet, with large heads, skinny limbs and black, bulging eyes. John went on to note that they were aggressive. He believed that these beings were the ones responsible for torturing his animals. During one such incident where these entities made themselves known, he asked, "What are you doing on my ranch? Why are you violating my house? Why are you trying to kill my family? And why are you killing my animals?" He never received an answer to any of his questions, but they did continue to be aggressive and harmful to the Edmonds and their animals moving forwards. The Edmonds would be visited by these entities up to 3 times a week. They were always in groups of 3. John, now thinking the bat to be ineffective, wanted to kill one of these beings as evidence of these strange visitations and replace the bat with a sword. It was 6 o'clock and getting dark. John was heading towards his kitchen when he noticed 3 of these entities inside his home. His Rottweilers began barking aggressively and charged at the entities. They began biting at them while John struck one of them with his sword, impaling it and retrieving a chunk of flesh as he brought the sword back. The entities then vanished into thin air. John, not knowing what to do, placed the flesh inside a glass jar and stored it in the freezer. He noted that the flesh was emanating what he described as a liquid that resembled brake fluid and seemed to be very acidic. At the time, John was a producer for a radio station and worked alongside the host, Kevin Smith, who put John in contact with a captain of the US Air Force named Robert Collins. John got in touch with Robert and asked him, if you had found a dead alien, what would you do with it? Robert asked if he had one, and John said that he had part of one. Robert then put John in touch with biophysicist Dr. Levengood, who showed skepticism but great interest in John's situation. John sent the flesh to Dr. Levengood, who performed a number of procedures and tests. He kept some of the flesh for himself and sent some of the flesh to a number of major universities for testing without telling them what it was claimed to be. The flesh then underwent DNA testing at these facilities. Dr. Levengood got back in touch with John 3 months later. He seemed excited and told him, "You have the smoking gun, you have absolute proof of alien visitation here on Earth." He goes on to tell John that they need to call Big TV and stage a news conference about the findings, but John wanted to do it in a less dramatic way and suggested that they go to a scientific conference instead and show the findings. Now, this is where things get really bizarre. John and Dr. Levengood had this whole thing set up. They had dates for the conference, people had signed up to attend, and everything was ready to go. However, suddenly, Dr. Levengood cut all contact with the Edmonds. John would later find out that Dr. Levengood had died. He had reportedly tripped and fell in his lab, causing head injuries. John would also find out that the samples had gone missing, and to make matters even more mysterious, Dr. Levengood's wife died a couple of weeks afterwards. Sometime after this, John and a friend of his were outside cleaning his gun collection when all of a sudden a black SUV pulled up to the ranch and 2 men dressed entirely in black got out of the car and proceeded towards the gate. The gate was 7 feet tall and it was locked. John was about to go over to the gate to let them in, however they just walked right through it. John and his friend, scared now, jumped and backed away. John had said that he thought they were with the government and wanted to scare him and must have had some sort of advanced technology that the general public wasn't aware of. These men proceeded up the path towards John and at 10 feet away they stopped. John said, "Who are you guys? Can I see some ID? You're trespassing here." They looked John straight in the eye and said, "Stop posting the pictures and information about the alien craft." John, trying to show that he wasn't scared, again requested for the ID and they ignored him. They turned around and walked back to their SUV, again right through the gates and left. John went on to note that the men looked really strange and didn't seem right. They wore black glasses, were extremely pale and had no facial expressions. John, now fearing for his safety, decided to go public and appeared on radio stations such as Coast to Coast to share his story. Thinking that if his story was out there, it would be very suspicious if he were to suffer the same fate as Dr. Levengood. Joyce, on the other hand, wished to remain silent and has indicated that she wishes to have no publicity and refuses to take part in interviews. Throughout their time spent at the ranch, the Edmonds reported being harassed on numerous occasions, during which they were unable to move or scream, and this seemed to happen to Joyce more than John. However, John has said that he believes that these beings have branded him. Without warning, he felt an excruciating pain and a sense of crushing pressure followed by an indentation in his left leg. They have both woken up with puncture wounds on their skin, and many times they would find bruises on their inner thighs, abdomen and chest. They have both been left with triangular depressions in the skin, have experienced skin disfigurement similar to what one would experience if exposed to radiation. The Edmonds have also reported many accounts of missing time and fear that they may have been abducted. Joyce reportedly has levitated on several occasions, and John, in an attempt to prevent her from being abducted, handcuffed her to the bed overnight. On a previous occasion, John noted that she was being levitated into a beam of light, but John opened fire with an AK-47 in the direction of the craft and she was released. These encounters are incredible and unbelievable, but the Edmonds maintain that everything they have reported is true. Incidents would continue to occur on the ranch, and the Edmonds would be visited by these men in black numerous times, almost as if the men were observing them. In 2016, John and Joyce agreed that they needed to sell the ranch and leave for their own safety. To this day, I do not believe that they have sold the ranch yet, but Robert Bigelow, the owner of Bigelow Aerospace, did at one point show interest in the property. Now, I have come across a theory that made the case that perhaps John's story is true, but exaggerated. It was noted that these men in black may have threatened John and Joyce with the same fate as Dr. Levengard and told him to spread the story, but to exaggerate it to make it look like the ravings of a madman. Obviously, that is total speculation and there is no evidence of any kind for this, but nevertheless, it remains an interesting theory. I'd just like to thank everyone for supporting the channel. I really appreciate all the nice comments. I do read them all and reply when I can, so feel free to keep leaving them. And sorry if this video sounded a little different to normal. I've got a new microphone and I've got a bit of a cold as well, so yeah, hopefully it wasn't too bad. I'd just like to say a special thank you to my patrons for supporting me over at Patreon, which is linked in the description if you'd like to take a look. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. I hope you have a great day, or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.
And I used to climb up there and lay down and look up at the sky through the back window, and I saw this this white light. It was kind of following us in the sky, and it started getting closer and closer to us.
Throughout history, many people all over the world have reported seeing unidentified objects in the skies. Strangely, these objects have also featured in various paintings throughout the centuries, including the famous Madonna with Saint Giovannino painting from the 15th century. Recorded sightings, however, are not where this phenomenon ends. Many individuals all around the globe have claimed that they have been taken against their will on board unusual flying craft and examined in very strange environments. Researchers have outlined in the past that the general features of these reported abductions are very similar to events reported in much earlier times, such as the fairy folklore of the British Isles. Other cultures around the world have also spoken of gods and spirits who occasionally take humans, often accompanied by periods of missing time, which has been present in many cases of these encounters. Now, let's examine the first case where an abduction did not take place, but physical evidence of something very unusual did. This encounter is perhaps one of the world's best known and detailed UFO encounters. In May of 1967, Stan Michalak vividly remembers when his father, Stefan Michalak, returned home unwell and injured after something highly unusual seemed to have taken place in the Falcon Lake Woods in Manitoba. Stan, when referring to seeing Stefan, stated, and I quote, "I recall seeing him in bed. He didn't look good at all. He looked very pale. When I walked into the bedroom, there was a huge stink in the room, like a real horrible aroma of sulphur and burnt motor. It was all around, and it was coming out of his pores. It was really bad." Former military policeman turned industrial mechanic and amateur geologist Stefan Michalak would often venture into the wilderness in the areas around Falcon Lake in search of quartz and silver. In May of 1967, Stefan set out to investigate the area, and on the 20th, Stefan discovered a vein of quartz along the Precambrian Shield area. At this point, Stefan reported being taken aback as the surrounding geese began to go crazy. According to Stefan, he looked up and detailed seeing two cigar-shaped objects, each with a reddish glow hovering around 45 meters away. One then descended, and Stefan said that it landed on a flat section of rock and seemed to take on a more of a disc shape, while the other remained in the air for a few minutes before taking off. Stefan's initial thoughts were that it must be a secret US military experimental craft and would sit down to sketch it over the next 30 minutes. Unfortunately, Stefan would come to make a mistake. He decided to approach whatever this thing was and recalled that the air felt warm and that he could smell sulphur as he approached, along with the sound of hissing. Stefan reported that during his approach, a door opened on the side and he saw bright lights inside while hearing muffled voices coming from the craft. He then called out, offering assistance to the, and I quote, Yankee boys if required. He didn't receive an answer, so Stefan tried in various other languages including Polish, Russian and German, but still never received a reply. Stefan would also come to note some very interesting features of the craft. He stated that it was made from a very smooth metal with absolutely no seams at all. At this point, Stefan put on his welding goggles that he brought to protect his eyes while chipping away at the rocks in the prospecting site. Apart from the intense flashing lights, he could not see anyone inside, and at this stage he said that 3 panels slid across the opening and sealed it shut. He then reached out to touch the craft, which he said melted the fingertips of the glove that he was wearing. Stefan went on to say that the craft then turned counterclockwise and noticed a grid pattern of holes that struck him with a blast of air or gas that pushed him backwards and badly burned his shirt and cap, which he quickly removed and watched as the craft flew away. Stefan then made his way back through the forest and vomited multiple times while doing so. He eventually reached his motel and caught a bus back to Winnipeg. He sought treatment at the hospital for the burns to his chest and stomach, which would bizarrely turn into raised sores in the same grid pattern. He suffered from diarrhea, headaches, blackouts and weight loss for weeks afterwards. After this story hit headlines, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, along with the Air Force and other government agencies, flooded the scene to conduct their own investigation. Stefan documented this incident in great detail, and when asked about his thoughts as to the origin of the craft, he stated, "I'm not so close-minded that I can't entertain the possibility that it's otherworldly. I can't discount that. But without specific evidence to show me that it is, I don't know," he continued. "What I can tell you is that I'm an aviation fanatic, a huge aviation buff, and I am very familiar with how the technology has advanced in the past 50 years. There was nothing even close to that in the works anywhere at that time. This case would see an extensive investigation, and the official conclusion, surprisingly, even from the United States Air Force, was that the case remains unexplained." Stefan's items were also retrieved from the site of the encounter, including his glove, shirt and some tools, which were all tested, but no one could determine what caused the burns. Bizarrely, at the landing site was a circle around 15 feet in diameter, completely devoid of any vegetation growing in all the surrounding areas. Soil samples and samples of the clothing were found to be highly radioactive. Even pieces of metal that were chipped out of the cracks in the rock a year later were also found to be radioactive. This case remains one of the strangest incidents ever recorded involving an unidentified flying object. Moving on, let's explore one of the most out there and one of the strangest cases of abduction that I've ever heard. In March of 1988, Amaury Rivera, who lived in New York at the time, received a phone call from his aunt informing him that his grandmother, Isabel, was very sick and that he should come back to Puerto Rico, located in Portugal, to see her. Thankfully and unexpectedly, Isabel made a full recovery, and Amaury was able to turn this devastating visit into a pleasant vacation and managed to fit in some travelling. Amaury would return to New York, but would ultimately decide that he needed to move back home to be with his family, and by mid-1988 he was back living in Puerto Rico. At this point, Amaury's cousin had asked him if he would go to Casablanca, where a salsa orchestra called El Gran Combo would be playing, as she wanted him to take pictures and have members of the orchestra sign a picture for Isabel, who was a big fan of theirs. Amaury agreed, but unfortunately, upon seeing just how many people were in the establishment, grew nervous and didn't go through with asking for an autograph, though did manage to take some pictures. This is where things begin to take a very bizarre turn. Amaury left for the parking lot around 4 AM and got in his car. He took the same route home as he did coming to the place, and at an intersection noticed that the direction he needed to go was filled with a very dense fog on the road, and detailed that it was very thick and white. He went on to say that because of the fog he drove very carefully and slowly as it became increasingly difficult to see. He said, and I quote, "My thoughts at the time were possibly encountering an animal on the road and preventing an accident." It's at this point Omori reported that he suddenly heard a strange noise beside the car, as if something was running close to the car trying to catch up. At first, he thought it was an animal, but out of the corner of his eye, noticed something small in stature running quickly on 2 legs towards the car. In a panic, he described slamming the brakes and came to an abrupt stop as he didn't want to hurt anyone with his car. He said that at this point, he wanted to take off but was paralysed with fear. He said, and I quote, "There was a being with an enormous head right in front of the car, to the right, walking towards me from the fog. The right headlight of my car was now on him, making its look even more grotesque. It had pale skin and was reminiscent of clown makeup. It was wearing tight-fitting clothes that were an olive green. Its arms were proportionate with its body, which was around 3.5 feet tall." Omori reported feeling very confused and scared, noting that he had no idea how this entity was able to reach the side of his car so quickly. He said that another one appeared and thought that they were demons and found himself paralysed in fear, unable to drive away, before blacking out. When Omori came to, he stated that he was still in his car, confused because as he looked around he thought that he was in an underground parking lot. He said that he was no longer outside, and near him were 10 or so other cars. There were no signs and the place was only dimly lit. He said that he couldn't find any way out and began to feel very claustrophobic. He went on and stated that the whole place was silent, and out of nowhere the entity previously described was right outside his car. He specifically noted that the eyes chilled him to his core. If things weren't already strange enough, he detailed that he blacked out again and woke up seated with other people in a square room, and said that his eyes were swollen and both his hands and neck were in pain. He detailed that sitting next to him was a teenager wearing only shorts, and said that his shoes were missing. At this point, he describes that an entity around 5'8" entered the room wearing completely black, skin-tight clothing and said in perfect Spanish, "I'm not here to hurt you, relax, don't be frightened, I am as human as you are." At this point, everyone in the room was shown a series of projections, some of which involved catastrophic events taking place all over the earth. They were told, "In your world, the one you call Earth, you've done nothing but destroy, contaminate, and spiritually decline." After a series of these projections, he reported that he lost consciousness again and woke up sat in his car on a road. He said that he could hear a jet aircraft and noticed that an enormous flying disc was hovering in the sky. He went on to say that 3 military jets seemed to have been scrambled and were making passes on the disc, and then took this photo of the event. Omori has always been adamant that he was telling the truth. What do you think? This next incident also sounds very far-fetched, but it is claimed to be true and has been investigated by various sources over the years, including physician Walter Carl Buehler, founder of the Brazilian Society of Flying Disc Studies. Anyway, let me know what you think. On the 14th of May 1958, Arthur Bellette went missing in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil under very strange circumstances, and would return 11 days later on the 25th with an incredible account of his ordeal. He stated, and I quote, "I was walking on foot on the highway in the direction of the city of Sarandi. It was already dark when I saw this strange and luminous object near the ditch of a farm. I left the street and went closer to verify what it was, and as I saw no life near, I went closer. Within 10 meters, I saw people turning a light on me that blinded me, and I lost consciousness for between half an hour to 1 hour." Bellette would later state that these visitors were there to collect grains and vegetables for experimentation, and thought that Bellette himself was a farmer. When he came around, he found himself inside a rectangular room tied to what he described as a hospital-like bed. Minutes later, 2 beings entered the room and released him from the bed and took him to a compartment adjacent to the room, where he states that he was forced to wear a cape with long sleeves. He said that at this point he began to feel ill and realised that he hadn't eaten for a while, though wasn't sure for how long. Bellette was then given a tray of food and described the food as being like meat, but with the consistency of a dark floury sponge cake. He went on to say that he was also given water that he described as being lighter than usual. If things weren't already out there and just totally bizarre, things only get stranger from here. After resting for a while, he was taken and placed in front of 5 beings. Arthur was fluent in Portuguese, Spanish and Italian and tried to initiate conversation in all of his dominant languages, to which none of them replied. He then turned to German, which he wasn't as confident with, but said that as he tried German, one of the beings he would come to know, called a Kork, began to speak with him. Arthur would come to learn that they were on the planet called a cart and that it had been unified for around a century. The abolishment of frontiers meant the end of wars and the use of money. He was then told that on a cart, the supreme ruler was chosen every 3 years by popular vote.